"Grandma Evelyn, your table is right this way," the wedding coordinator said with a tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. I followed her across the ballroom of the Grand Wellington Hotel, my silver heels sinking slightly into the thick ivory carpet, while crystal chandeliers shimmered above us like something out of an old Hollywood movie. For a moment I thought she must have made a mistake. The tables closest to the stage were dressed in white orchids and gold candles, filled with Connor's business associates, Vanessa's country club friends, and women young enough to be my granddaughter wearing champagne-colored dresses that probably cost more than my first car. But the coordinator kept walking. Past the dance floor. Past the family tables. Past the photographers adjusting their cameras beside the wedding cake. All the way to the back corner beside the swinging kitchen doors where waiters rushed in and out carrying trays of steak and lobster tails. "Here we are," she said softly. A tiny round table sat alone against the wall beside a stack of folded high chairs. Every few seconds the kitchen doors swung open with a burst of heat, noise, and the smell of garlic butter. My place card read Evelyn Cartwright in thin gold lettering, though someone had spelled my last name wrong. I stared at it for several seconds before finally sitting down. A waiter brushed past me so quickly his tray nearly clipped my shoulder. From where I sat, I couldn't even see Chloe and Daniel's sweetheart table unless I leaned sideways. I felt invisible already, and the ceremony hadn't even started. Vanessa floated across the ballroom in a fitted cream-colored gown, smiling brightly at guests as though she owned the entire evening. Technically, I suppose she felt she did. After all, she'd spent the last 11 months planning every flower arrangement, every imported wine bottle, every violin performance using my money. Nearly $85,000 of it. My late husband's retirement account had quietly paid for the ballroom, the live band, the custom invitations, and the honeymoon suite overlooking Lake Geneva. Vanessa had called it a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. I had called it love. A young woman wearing a sequined green dress stopped beside my chair and glanced at me politely. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "Are you with the catering staff?" I smiled before she could see the humiliation settle across my face. "No," he replied calmly. "I'm the bride's grandmother." Her expression changed instantly. "Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry." She hurried away before I could reassure her. I looked toward the center of the ballroom where Chloe laughed beside her bridesmaids, radiant beneath the soft golden lights. I remembered holding her as a baby after her parents divorced. I remembered packing her school lunches, driving her to piano lessons, sitting through dance recitals with a bad knee because Connor was too busy building his insurance company, and Vanessa was too busy chasing charity galas and social events. Back then Chloe used to run into my arms every Sunday morning. Tonight she hadn't looked at me once. The kitchen door slammed open again behind me, and a burst of steam rolled across my tablecloth. Somewhere near the stage the violinist began playing "Can't Help Falling in Love." Guests raised champagne glasses while camera flashes sparkled across the ballroom. Then I noticed Vanessa staring at me from across the room. Our eyes met for barely a second before she leaned toward one of her friends and whispered something that made both women laugh quietly behind their wine glasses. And in that moment, sitting beside the kitchen entrance while strangers enjoyed the wedding I had paid for, I realized this table wasn't a mistake at all. The wedding reception unfolded around me like a beautiful party I had somehow wandered into by accident. Servers carried silver trays filled with crab cakes and champagne flutes while soft jazz drifted through the ballroom. Every table near the stage sparkled beneath tall floral centerpieces overflowing with white roses and orchids. Mine held a single candle in a glass holder that kept flickering every time the kitchen doors opened behind me. I folded my hands carefully in my lap and tried not to look as alone as I felt. Across the room, Vanessa stood near the ice sculpture greeting guests with the polished smile she reserved for wealthy people and photographers. Connor hovered beside her, laughing too loudly at jokes that were not especially funny. My son looked expensive now. Tailored tuxedo. Gold cufflinks. The kind of watch men buy when they want the world to know they have finally made it. Sometimes I still saw flashes of the little boy who used to leave dandelions on my kitchen counter because he thought they looked elegant in a water glass. But lately those flashes disappeared faster and faster. "This wedding is absolutely stunning," a woman at the neighboring table said loudly to her husband. "Vanessa must have spent a fortune." I looked down at the untouched bread plate in front of me and smiled faintly to myself. Vanessa had certainly spent it. Just not hers. $85,000. The number still sounded unreal in my mind. I remembered the afternoon she sat at my kitchen table with binders full of fabric swatches and venue brochures spread across the surface beside my coffee cups. "I just want Chloe to have the wedding I never had," she had said softly while squeezing my hand. At the time, her voice trembled enough to seem sincere. I had believed her. I had believed all of them. I sold the last of Harold's antique coin collection to help cover the orchestra and the imported floral arrangements. I withdrew money from the savings account Harold and I built over 43 years together. The same account we once planned to use for traveling after retirement. Italy, Maine in the fall, maybe even Alaska. Instead, that money now paid for crystal champagne towers and customized wedding favors stamped with Chloe and Daniel's initials in gold foil. Another waiter brushed past my chair as the kitchen doors burst open behind me. For a moment, the smell of grilled salmon and dish soap swallowed the expensive perfume drifting through the ballroom. A group of bridesmaids hurried by laughing, barely noticing me. One of them bumped my table hard enough to rattle the silverware. "Sorry," she muttered without stopping. I glanced toward the stage again. Chloe stood beside Daniel beneath soft golden lights while photographers circled them like bees around. Flowers. She looked beautiful tonight. But distant too. Like someone already belonging to another world entirely. Then the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage holding a microphone. "Before dinner is served," he announced warmly, "the family would like to thank everyone who helped make this magical evening possible." Applause filled the ballroom. Vanessa dabbed delicately beneath her eyes while Connor wrapped an arm around her waist. The master of ceremonies thanked the wedding planner, the bridesmaids, Daniel's parents, Vanessa's charity committee friends. Even the pastry chef received applause. But my name never came. Applause rolled through the ballroom while I sat quietly beside the kitchen doors with my hands folded in my lap. The candle on my table flickered again as another waiter hurried past carrying trays of roasted chicken and asparagus. Across the room, Vanessa smiled modestly as guests praised the perfect wedding she had created. Connor looked proud standing beside her, nodding along as though every glowing compliment belonged equally to him. I wondered if either of them felt even a second of discomfort knowing exactly whose savings account had paid for those compliments. The master of ceremonies finally stepped down from the stage and dinner service began. Plates appeared in front of guests almost immediately, but mine did not. I sat for nearly 15 minutes watching everyone else eat, while servers rushed around me in organized chaos. Eventually a young waiter approached looking flustered. "I am so sorry, ma'am," he said quietly. "Your meal ticket somehow got misplaced." Somehow. That word lingered in my mind longer than it should have. "It is fine," I replied gently even though my stomach had tightened into a hard knot hours ago. He hurried away toward the kitchen while laughter echoed across the ballroom. I reached for my water glass and noticed my hand trembling slightly. Just then the enormous projector screens beside the stage flickered to life for the family slideshow Vanessa had spent weeks bragging about. Soft piano music filled the room as photographs began appearing one after another. Chloe as a baby wrapped in pink blankets. Chloe at Disney World. Chloe graduating high school. Connor and Vanessa smiling on ski trips and beach vacations. Family Christmas cards from years I remembered clearly because I had mailed half of them myself. I watched every image carefully, waiting for even one photograph of Harold and me with Chloe. There were none. Not a single one. 40 years of family history had somehow been edited into a version where I barely existed. A pressure settled heavily against my chest, not sharp enough to frighten me but deep enough to hurt. Then one photograph appeared of Chloe standing beside the blue bicycle I bought her for her 10th birthday. The picture had been cropped so tightly that my arm was still visible beside her shoulder, while the rest of me had been cut entirely out. I stared at the screen for several long seconds. It felt deliberate, like someone carefully erasing fingerprints from a photograph. "Excuse me, ma'am." I turned to find an older woman standing beside my table wearing a black hotel uniform and sensible shoes. Her silver name tag read Marcia. "Would you mind if I fixed your centerpiece?" she asked softly. I nodded politely. She adjusted the candle holder for a moment before leaning slightly closer to me. "I just wanted you to know," she whispered carefully. Your seat was not supposed to be back here. I looked at her without speaking. Marcia glanced toward Vanessa across the ballroom before lowering her voice even further. You were originally assigned to the family table beside the bride. The kitchen door swung open behind me again with a burst of heat and noise. Then about an hour before guests arrived, Marcia continued quietly, someone asked us to move you. I swallowed slowly. Who? Her expression tightened with obvious discomfort. The bride's mother said your table placement fit the aesthetic better this way. For the first time that evening I stopped feeling embarrassed and started feeling something colder. Marcia walked away before I could ask another question, disappearing through the swinging kitchen doors with an empty tray balanced against her hip. I sat very still after that. Around me the ballroom remained warm and glittering, filled with expensive perfume, soft candlelight, and the steady hum of happy conversation. But something inside me had shifted permanently. The humiliation no longer felt accidental. It had shape now. Intention. I looked down at the wrinkled linen napkin resting untouched in my lap and suddenly remembered another napkin nearly 20 years earlier, folded into the shape of a swan at Chloe's 7th birthday party. She had insisted on having her party in my backyard because she said Grandma Evelyn made everything prettier. I spent 3 days decorating that yard with pink ribbons and fairy lights while Harold grilled hamburgers beside the patio. Chloe followed me everywhere carrying a tiny plastic tiara crooked on her head. When I grow up, she told me proudly that afternoon, you are going to sit right next to me at my wedding. At the time we all laughed because she was only 7 and still missing 2 front teeth. I remembered how tightly she held my hand while blowing out birthday candles. I remembered the way Connor used to call me every Sunday asking if I could watch Chloe overnight, because he and Vanessa needed a break. I never once said no. Not when Chloe had the flu at 11 and slept in my bed for 4 nights while I sat awake changing cold washcloths on her forehead. Not when Connor lost money during the recession and Vanessa cried at my kitchen table saying they might lose their house. Harold and I quietly refinanced our own mortgage to help them through that year. We never told anyone. Family was not supposed to keep score. Another burst of laughter rose from the dance floor while waiters cleared salad plates from nearby tables. Across the ballroom Vanessa tilted her head back laughing at something one of her friends said. Her diamonds caught the chandelier light every time she moved. I suddenly remembered a conversation from 6 months earlier, while we were shopping for wedding decorations in downtown Chicago. Vanessa had held up a set of antique candle holders and smiled politely at me before saying, "Vintage works beautifully in small doses, but too much of it can make an event feel old." At the time I thought she was talking about centerpieces. Now I wondered if she had been talking about me all along. I looked toward Chloe again. She was standing near the photographer now, glowing beneath the soft ballroom lights while guests gathered around her for pictures. Young faces, smooth skin, designer tuxedos and sparkling dresses, carefully curated perfection. And for the first time all evening I stopped wondering whether I belonged there. The answer had already been given to me beside the kitchen doors. A waiter finally arrived carrying my dinner plate long after everyone else had nearly finished eating. "Again, I am really sorry for the delay," he said quietly while setting the plate in front of me. I smiled politely and thanked him anyway. Then I noticed something strange resting beside my fork. A folded ivory card with my name written across the front in elegant gold ink. I frowned slightly before opening it beneath the candlelight. Inside, in neat handwriting, were only 7 words. "You need to see what they plan tomorrow." I slipped the folded card into my purse before anyone noticed it in my hands. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne toasts and camera flashes while I sat quietly at my small table beside the kitchen doors pretending everything was normal. Chloe and Daniel shared their first dance beneath soft golden lights while guests gathered around the dance floor smiling through tears. Connor raised a glass during his speech and thanked everyone who had supported this beautiful journey. His eyes swept across the ballroom without ever landing on me. Vanessa cried delicately at all the appropriate moments, dabbing beneath her eyes with a linen napkin while guests admired what a devoted mother she seemed to be. I watched her carefully now. Every smile, every glance, every calculated touch on Connor's arm whenever wealthy guests approached their table. Once you see manipulation clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. Around 10:30 the ballroom slowly began emptying as older guests headed upstairs to their hotel rooms, and younger ones drifted toward the rooftop bar for after-parties. I remained seated beside the kitchen entrance long after my untouched dessert plate had been cleared away. I could not stop thinking about the note hidden inside my purse. You need to see what they plan tomorrow. The handwriting looked feminine but unfamiliar. Neat. Controlled. Intentional. Finally I stood, smoothing my navy satin dress carefully before walking toward the elevators. The Grand Wellington's marble lobby glowed softly beneath oversized chandeliers, while exhausted wedding guests crossed the floor carrying gift bags and flower arrangements. I had just pressed the elevator button when I heard someone call my name quietly behind me. Mrs. Cartwright. I turned to find Marcia standing near the concierge desk, still wearing her hotel uniform beneath a gray cardigan. Without the ballroom lighting, she looked older than I first realized, perhaps close to my own age. She glanced around briefly before stepping closer. "I hope you do not mind," she said softly. "But I was the one who left the note." I stared at her for a moment without speaking. "Why?" Her expression tightened with something that looked almost like guilt. "Because I overheard a conversation tonight that did not sit right with me." The elevator doors opened behind us, but neither of us moved. "After the brunch tomorrow morning," Marcia continued carefully, "your son and his wife are planning to meet with a realtor here at the hotel." A cold heaviness settled slowly into my chest. "A realtor?" She nodded once. "They were discussing your house." The lobby suddenly felt too warm. Too bright. "I only heard pieces," she admitted quietly. "Something about listing the property before fall, and moving you somewhere smaller afterward. Your daughter-in-law said you would not put up much resistance once the wedding was over." For several seconds I could only hear the soft fountain trickling near the hotel entrance. My house. The white Colonial Herald and I bought 38 years ago with peeling shutters and a broken mailbox we repaired together one summer weekend after Connor turned 6. The house where every Christmas morning happened. Every birthday. Every grief. Every piece of my life. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally, though my voice sounded strangely distant even to myself. Marcia hesitated before speaking one last time. "I do not think they realize who they are dealing with." Then she turned quietly and disappeared across the marble lobby, while I stood there alone staring at my reflection in the elevator doors, realizing the wedding had never been the ending of anything. It was only the beginning. I did not sleep that night. I sat beside the window in my hotel room wearing my robe while downtown Chicago glowed below me in soft ribbons of gold and white light. Around 2 in the morning, I made myself a cup of coffee using the tiny machine beside the dresser and stared at the framed photograph I always carried while traveling. Harold stood beside me in front of our house, smiling with one arm around my shoulders while autumn leaves covered the lawn behind us. The picture had been taken 12 years earlier, before the gray settled fully into his hair, before hospitals and medications and funeral flowers became part of my vocabulary. "Do not let people shame you out of what you built," he used to say whenever Connor pushed too hard for money during his younger years. Back then I thought Harold worried too much. By 7:30 the next morning, the hotel restaurant buzzed with soft conversation and clinking silverware as wedding guests gathered for brunch. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows overlooking Lake Michigan, while servers carried trays of cinnamon rolls and fresh fruit between tables. Vanessa stood near the entrance greeting everyone in a cream sweater dress that probably cost more than my first mortgage payment. "There she is," she said brightly the moment she noticed me. Her voice carried just enough sweetness to sound convincing to strangers. "Everyone was wondering where you disappeared to last night." I smiled politely and took the seat assigned to me at the far end of the table. Again. Not beside family. Not near Chloe. At the far end beside 2 distant cousins from Milwaukee I had never met before. Connor barely looked up from his phone while Daniel discussed honeymoon plans with several friends. "We are thinking about Greece next summer too," Vanessa announced loudly while stirring cream into her coffee. "Maybe Santorini. We deserve a little reward after surviving this wedding stress." Surviving. An interesting word considering she spent the past year spending money that did not belong to her. I reached calmly for my coffee cup and noticed Connor finally glancing toward me. "Mom," he said casually, "Vanessa and I were actually hoping to talk to you later today." There it was. Smooth. Relaxed. Rehearsed. "About what?" I asked quietly. Vanessa leaned forward immediately. Nothing serious, she said with a soft laugh. Just some ideas about simplifying things for you a little. Simplifying. Another interesting word. Your house is a lot for one person now, Connor added quickly. Especially at your age. At your age. I stirred my coffee slowly without answering. Around us the restaurant filled with laughter and wedding stories while waiters poured orange juice into crystal glasses. No one at the table noticed the shift happening inside me. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Something steadier than that. Clarity. Actually, Vanessa continued carefully, we found a beautiful senior community in Naperville last month. It has yoga classes and garden clubs and transportation services. She smiled brightly as though describing a luxury resort. We just want you somewhere easier to manage. Easier for whom, I wondered silently. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated quietly beside my plate. I glanced down and saw a name I had not expected. Thomas Breen. Harold's attorney. My pulse slowed instantly. Excuse me, I said calmly while standing from the table. Vanessa looked mildly irritated by the interruption. Connor barely noticed. I walked across the restaurant toward the quiet hallway outside the banquet rooms before answering the call. Mrs. Cartwright, Thomas said without greeting, his voice unusually serious. I believe it is time we discuss the trust your husband established before he passed away. Especially before your son makes a very expensive mistake. Thomas Breen asked me to meet him that afternoon at his office overlooking Wacker Drive. I returned to the brunch afterward wearing the same calm expression I had practiced for years at funerals, hospitals, and difficult family holidays. Vanessa was describing floral costs to one of her friends when I sat back down at the table. Connor glanced at me briefly. Everything okay? He asked without much interest. Perfectly fine, I replied while unfolding my linen napkin across my lap. Across the restaurant, Chloe laughed at something Daniel whispered into her ear. Young love always looked invincible from a distance. I wondered how long that illusion lasted once money and ambition entered the room. The rest of brunch drifted by in polite conversation and forced smiles. Vanessa spoke endlessly about future vacations, kitchen renovations, and social events planned for the summer. Connor nodded along while checking emails between bites of smoked salmon. Neither of them realized I had already stopped listening. By 1 o'clock I sat inside Thomas Breen's office watching rain gather against the windows high above the Chicago River. Thomas looked older than I remembered, his silver hair thinner now, his reading glasses resting lower on his nose. Harold trusted him completely. That mattered to me more than any legal document ever could. Your husband anticipated this possibility years ago, Thomas said carefully while sliding a thick folder across his desk toward me. I frowned slightly. What possibility? Thomas folded his hands together. Connor attempting to pressure you into surrendering control of the estate. A strange sadness settled over me hearing those words spoken aloud. Harold saw this coming long before I did. The house, the investment accounts, the trust distributions, Thomas continued calmly, none of them automatically belong to your son. He opened the folder revealing documents covered in signatures and legal seals. Everything remains entirely under your control, unless you willingly transfer ownership. I stared silently at the papers. For months Connor and Vanessa behaved as though my life was already something waiting to be divided between them. Thomas removed another document from the folder and placed it carefully in front of me. There is more. I looked up slowly. Harold included a behavioral protection clause within the trust. A what? Thomas suggested. His glasses. If any beneficiary is found manipulating, coercing, or intentionally humiliating you for financial gain, their inheritance rights may be suspended indefinitely at your discretion. The office suddenly felt very quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows while traffic moved far below us through wet downtown streets. Harold believed respect mattered more than blood, Thomas said gently. I lowered my eyes toward the papers again, remembering the ballroom, the kitchen doors, the missing photographs, the carefully chosen table hidden beside the staff entrance. Not one cruel act by itself, but together they formed something undeniable. There is one more thing you should know, Thomas added after a long pause. Your son contacted a realtor 3 weeks ago, asking about listing your property before the end of summer. I closed the folder slowly with both hands resting on top of it. Something inside me finally settled into place then. Not revenge. Not anger. Decision. What happens now? Thomas asked quietly. I looked out across the rain-covered city for several long seconds before answering. Now, I said calmly, they learn the difference between kindness and weakness. When I returned home 2 days later, the house greeted me with the same quiet warmth it always had. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors while the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily beside the staircase Harold built with his own hands 30 years earlier. I stood in the entryway for a long moment without turning on the lights. Every picture frame, every scratch in the banister, every faded corner of wallpaper carried pieces of my life inside it. And Connor wanted to sell it like an outdated piece of furniture. I set my suitcase beside the stairs and walked slowly into the kitchen. The coffee mug Harold used every morning still sat in the cabinet exactly where he left it before he died. Blue ceramic with a tiny chip near the handle. I touched it gently before opening the folder Thomas had given me earlier that afternoon. Legal documents spread across the kitchen table beneath the soft yellow glow of the overhead light. Trust agreements. Property. Records. Financial statements. Control. For the first time in months, maybe years, I finally understood something clearly. I was not dependent on Connor and Vanessa. They were dependent on the future they believed they would inherit from me. My phone buzzed just after 7 that evening. Vanessa. I let it ring twice before answering. We missed you after brunch, she said sweetly. Connor said you disappeared pretty quickly. I smiled faintly though she could not see it. I had some business downtown. Well, we were actually hoping to stop by next weekend, she continued casually. There are a few things we wanted to discuss about the house. Of course there were. That will not be necessary, I replied calmly. Silence lingered for half a second too long. What do you mean? She asked carefully. I reached for a pen lying beside the trust documents. I mean, I have already started making arrangements for my future. Her tone sharpened almost immediately beneath the politeness. Without talking to Connor first? There it was. Not concern. Ownership. My future does not require permission, I said softly. Another silence followed. Then the sweet voice returned. Of course. We only want what is best for you. I ended the call a few moments later and sat quietly at the kitchen table listening to the refrigerator hum softly in the background. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows while neighborhood porch lights flickered on one by one across the street. I opened the trust amendment Thomas prepared and signed my name carefully at the bottom of the final page. Effective immediately, all discretionary distributions to Connor Cartwright were suspended pending further review. The house could not be sold, transferred, or refinanced without my written approval. And Vanessa Reed Cartwright was permanently removed from any indirect beneficiary consideration connected to the estate. The pen moved steadily across the paper without hesitation. Strange how peaceful clarity feels once fear disappears. Afterward, I placed the signed documents neatly back inside the folder and carried it upstairs to the small cedar chest beside my bed where Harold used to keep important family records. Before closing the lid, I looked once more at the photograph resting on top of the papers. Harold smiled back at me exactly as he always had. Quiet. Certain. As though he already knew this day would come eventually. Downstairs my phone buzzed again and again against the kitchen counter. Connor this time. Then Vanessa. Then Connor once more. I left every call unanswered. 3 days later Connor arrived at my house unannounced just after noon. I saw his black SUV pull into the driveway while I was trimming roses near the front porch. The same porch where he used to sit every Halloween counting candy beside Harold in oversized winter coats. He stepped out wearing dark sunglasses and an expression already sharpened by irritation. Vanessa followed several seconds later carrying an expensive leather handbag against her arm like she was arriving for a business meeting instead of visiting family. Mom, Connor called while walking toward me across the lawn. Why have you been ignoring our calls? I set the gardening shears carefully onto the porch railing before answering. I have been busy. Vanessa forced a small laugh. Busy enough to freeze financial distributions? There was no sweetness left in her voice now. Interesting how quickly politeness disappears when money feels threatened. I opened the front door without inviting them inside immediately. Would you like some coffee? Connor removed his sunglasses impatiently. We are not here for coffee. Of course not. They were here for control. I led them into the kitchen anyway, where sunlight poured across the table Harold built by hand during one long snowy winter decades ago. Vanessa remained standing while Connor paced slowly near the refrigerator. Thomas Breen contacted me yesterday, Connor said finally. He said you changed trust arrangements without discussing it with the family. The family? I almost smiled hearing that word now. The trust belongs to me, I replied calmly while pouring coffee into 3 mugs anyway. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. Connor has spent years helping you manage things. Really? I asked softly. Because lately it seems Connor has been managing plans for my house before I am even gone. Silence settled heavily across the kitchen. Connor stopped pacing. Vanessa looked toward him immediately. Small movements reveal truth faster than words ever do. Mom, Connor began carefully, we were only trying to help you prepare for the future. I slid a mug of coffee toward him across the table. By meeting with a realtor before speaking to me? His face changed instantly. Not guilt. Panic. Just for a second. But I saw it clearly. Vanessa stepped in quickly. This is exactly why we were worried about you living alone, she said sharply. You are confused. Emotional. Ever since the wedding you have been acting irrational. The wedding. Finally. There it was sitting openly between us at last. I looked directly at her for the first time since they arrived. Do you know what I remember most about Chloe's wedding? I asked quietly. Vanessa blinked once but said nothing. Not the flowers. Not the music. Not the ballroom. I folded my hands gently together on top of the kitchen table. I remember sitting beside the kitchen doors while strangers asked whether I worked for the catering staff. Connor lowered his eyes immediately. Vanessa remained perfectly still. I remember family photographs where I no longer existed, I continued softly. I remember hearing that my table placement matched the aesthetic better. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Connor rubbed one hand across his jaw before finally speaking. Mom, it was just seating. Vanessa worked hard planning everything and maybe some mistakes happened. No, he replied calmly. Mistakes are accidental. Humiliation requires intention. Vanessa's composure cracked then. You are being dramatic, she snapped suddenly. Everything cannot revolve around you forever. I nodded slowly as though she had finally confirmed something important for me. Then I stood from the table and walked quietly toward the cedar chest near the hallway. Inside rested the folder Thomas prepared. I carried it back carefully and placed it in front of Connor without another word. He opened it slowly while Vanessa leaned over his shoulder reading each page faster and faster. By the 3rd document all color drained from her face. Connor looked up at me stunned. You removed us, he whispered. I shook my head gently. No, Connor. You removed yourselves the moment you stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as inventory. Outside the kitchen window the afternoon sun settled warmly across the rose bushes Harold planted years ago. For the first time in a very long while this house felt peaceful again.